The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled frantic notes, and the spectators murmured among themselves, anticipating the unfolding of the most controversial case of the year. At the center of the trial was Elon Musk, the technology magnate, sitting calmly, showing no sign of nervousness. His gaze was cold, calculating, and his hands were clasped atop the table as if he were watching a show whose ending he already knew. The judge, a middle-aged man with a peculiar sense of humor, flipped through the documents before him, shaking his head in a mix of amusement and disbelief. He raised his eyes to Musk and let out a slight laugh before speaking, his voice laden with sarcasm. Elon Musk, the brilliant billionaire who thinks he is above the law. A stifled laugh ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor, confident, crossed his arms and smiled. To him, this trial was not just about justice. It was about exposing Musk to ridicule and showing that even the most powerful men could be brought down. The judge leaned slightly forward, watching Musk intently. "I hope you're ready, Mr. Musk. This isn't one of your Twitter debates. This is a courtroom." Another collective laugh echoed through the room, but Musk remained still, his face impassive. Then, with a slight adjustment of his suit, he leaned forward and, for the first time, opened his mouth. "Your Honor, I am eager to hear the accusation. After all, I always enjoy a good story." The tone of irony was unmistakable. The prosecutor narrowed his eyes and began to speak, walking with firm steps through the courtroom, his voice full of certainty and conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because a billionaire believes he can ignore the law. He runs his company as if it were his personal empire, disregarding rules and regulations, endangering not only his employees, but the very structure that keeps our society functioning." He turned to the judge, his gaze steady. "The evidence is overwhelming. Musk's company consciously violated fundamental standards, demonstrating a blatant disregard for the system. And today, Your Honor, this court must show that no one, not even Elon Musk, is above the law." The judge nodded, a wry smile on his lips. "Mr. Musk, I suppose you understand the gravity of these charges." Musk tilted his head slightly, without taking his eyes off the judge. He had yet to offer a substantial response. The prosecutor continued, dramatically flipping through his documents. "Your Honor, this is not merely a case of corporate negligence. This is challenging the very framework of the law. Mr. Musk has built his reputation by pushing boundaries, ignoring norms, but today he has reached a limit that cannot be bent." A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. The judge smiled again, leaning forward. "Mr. Musk, do you intend to defend yourself? Or shall I call someone to explain legal terminology to you?" More laughter ensued. The prosecutor grinned, seizing the opportunity to humiliate his opponent. "Your Honor, the defendant seems to think all of this is one big joke. Perhaps he believes he is at a press conference, where he can simply tweet his way out of trouble. But today, we are dealing with facts, not Twitter polls." The judge reclined, folding his arms. "Mr. Musk, I must admit I'm curious. Do you really have a defense, or are we just here to watch you work on your next meme?" The courtroom erupted in laughter. The jury exchanged glances, as if this were an easy case. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request that the court acknowledge the evidence against the defendant and swiftly move toward a just sentence." The judge gave a slight nod. "Mr. Musk, I suggest you say something now, before I start wondering if you even belong in this courtroom." It was the first time Musk moved. He took a deep breath, adjusted his blazer, and finally stood up. His gaze swept calmly across the courtroom. Then, with a slight smile, he began. "Your Honor, I would like to thank the prosecution for their brilliant theatrical performance. It is always fascinating to see how reality can be dramatized to resemble a story worthy of the movies." The courtroom murmured in surprise. The judge narrowed his eyes, the tone of amusement beginning to fade. Musk continued, his steps slow and calculated. We keep hearing about rules, about laws, about how I supposedly disrespected the system. But there is a fundamental problem with that argument. It assumes that the system, as it currently stands, makes sense. The prosecutor scoffed. Is that your defense, Mr. Musk, that the law makes no sense? Musk slowly turned towards him, his eyes intense. No. My defense is that the law, as you understand it, is contradictory. And if there's one thing that physics teaches us, it's that real principles do not contradict themselves. The law, on the other hand, he pulled a document from the table, casually flipping through its pages. This entire case is based on the idea that my company violated regulations. So let's take a look at these rules, shall we? He held up a printed document. This law, which they claim incriminates me, was written years ago for an industry that has since completely changed. Its language is outdated, its framework inefficient, and most interestingly, Musk turned another page and raised his gaze directly to the judge. It contradicts itself. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. That is absurd. Musk raised a hand. Is it? Let's analyze this logically. If I follow this clause here, I'm violating another federal mandate over there. So, Your Honor, tell me, which of these laws should I follow? The one that says my company must operate, or the one that prevents its operation? The judge's smile vanished completely. He picked up the documents and began to leaf through them. His lips pressed into a firm line, and his gaze turned serious. The jury exchanged looks. The energy in the courtroom had shifted. Musk turned to the prosecutor. You assumed that I would not understand legal jargon. But the truth is, I don't need legal jargon to win this case. I just need logic. The judge reclined, his fingers drumming on the bench. He was no longer amused. Musk leaned forward, tapping lightly on the hefty legal tome on the table. And here's something even more interesting, Your Honor. Section 42.3 of this same law, the very one the prosecution insists on using against me, declares that... He slid a highlighted page toward the judge. Any technology that falls outside the scope of existing regulation must have new standards established before any legal action can be taken. The courtroom froze. The judge frowned, quickly reading the clause. The prosecutor, who had seemed so sure moments before, hurriedly flipped through his own documents. But it was too late. Musk had turned the tables. The prosecutor cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the narrative. Mr. Musk, that comparison is weak. The principles of the law still apply regardless of the evolution of technology. Musk smiled, a cold, sharp smile. That is interesting. So does that mean I can apply laws written for horse-drawn carriages to electric vehicles? Or perhaps we could regulate rockets with the same rules created for commercial airplanes? The courtroom fell silent. The judge pressed his lips together, once again perusing the document. The prosecutor opened his mouth to counter-argue, but nothing came out. Musk continued. And if we go even further, look at Section 43.1 of the same law on which the prosecution bases its case. He turned another page, pointing directly to the relevant passage. It is clearly stated here that if a new technology falls outside the scope of existing regulations, new standards must be established before any legal action can be taken. In other words, Your Honor, what they are trying to do here is not apply the law. It is distorting the law to fit their narrative. The judge reclined in his chair, drumming his fingers against the wooden arm of the bench. His gaze ran over the text, absorbing every word. Finally, he exhaled slowly and adjusted his glasses. Prosecutor, do you have a response to that? The prosecutor looked pale. He quickly flipped through his documents, desperately searching for something that could turn the tables in his favor. But he found nothing. With a slightly tense voice, He attempted to compose himself. "Your Honor, it is clear that the defendant's company operated without respecting basic regulatory principles. That is the central issue. Violating laws, regardless of technicalities, must be treated with due rigor." Musk tilted his head to the side like a teacher listening to a student's incorrect answer. "Funny. You call that a technicality, but those same technicalities are the foundation of your entire case. You want to choose which rules should be applied, but the matter is simple. You cannot selectively apply part of the law while ignoring another part that contradicts it. That is not justice. That is convenience." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The jury exchanged glances among themselves. The prosecutor looked nervously at the judge, who now seemed more interested than amused. Musk smiled. "But let's go further. Want to talk about precedents? Then let's talk about precedents. In the case of Smith and VTech Corp. In this very courtroom, it was decided that no company can be punished for operating in a legal gray area where existing laws do not cover its innovation. That case was decided based on the principle of justice and impartiality. And if you believe in the integrity of the legal system, then you know that the law must be applied fairly to everyone." The courtroom fell silent. The judge blinked slowly, recalling the case. And the worst part, the prosecutor himself had used that case as an argument in a previous dispute. Musk stepped forward, his tone now carrying even greater weight. "So, Your Honor, are we here to apply the law fairly? Or are we just trying to stifle innovation with outdated rules because it challenges the status quo?" The silence was absolute. The prosecutor clenched his fists, his options rapidly dwindling. He frantically flipped through his notes until, in one last effort, he grabbed a stack of papers and addressed the judge in a firm voice. "Your Honor, we have new evidence. This document proves that Mr. Musk consciously disregarded regulations. It's all here, in black and white." The onlookers held their breath, but Musk didn't even blink. Instead, he crossed his arms and watched as the lawyer dug his own grave. The judge took the papers and began flipping through them, frowning. "Mr. Musk, do you have anything to say about this?" Musk stepped forward, his voice calm, yet cutting. "Yes, Your Honor. This is fascinating, especially considering that this document was written after the lawsuit was initiated." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor paled. Musk raised an eyebrow. "So tell me, Your Honor, how can evidence be used to justify a case if it didn't even exist when the accusation was made?" The judge turned to the prosecutor, expecting an explanation. The lawyer opened his mouth, but no words came out. Musk continued, "You know what this looks like? It looks like a desperate attempt to patch the holes in an argument that was already sinking. It is not legal strategy. It is despair." The prosecutor balled his fists, but he knew. Everyone in the room knew. Musk had dismantled each of his arguments one by one, like a demolisher of legal certainties. The judge reclined in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment before exhaling slowly. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze was different. There was no more irony, no more jest, only respect. "Mr. Musk, I must admit that I underestimated you." A heavy silence filled the room. The judge continued, his voice laden with something that had not been there before, an admission that he had entered the courtroom with a mistaken view of the case. "When this court began to examine the case, we were convinced that your actions were irresponsible, perhaps even illegal. But after reviewing the arguments presented, I see that this is not the case." A series of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor stiffened. The judge looked to the defense, his voice firm. "The defendant has not only dismantled the accusations against him, but has exposed glaring flaws in the way this case was constructed. The evidence presented by the prosecution was inconsistent and, at worst, misleading. He cast a look toward the prosecutor, who lowered his head. Musk remained silent, letting the words sink in. The judge took a deep breath before delivering his verdict. This court finds no reason to proceed with the case. Mr. Musk, you are free to go. The opposing lawyer lost all color in his face. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words could be found. Musk simply smiled. He already knew that this would be the outcome. The courtroom began to empty, but the consequences of that moment would last far beyond that day. Outside, reporters ran with microphones raised, cameras flashing incessantly. "Mr. Musk, how do you feel about winning this case?" a journalist shouted. Musk put on his sunglasses and smiled slightly. Logic did its job. The headlines spread like wildfire. Elon Musk and the masterful legal coup, how he dismantled the accusation piece by piece. Some called him a genius, others a system manipulator. But one thing was certain. The impact of that case would change the way the world viewed regulations and their applicability in the face of innovation. The judge, once skeptical, now saw Musk in a different light. He would later admit in an interview, "He forced us to rethink everything. He didn't just defend himself. He exposed flaws in the system itself. But Musk, he was already elsewhere, ready for his next challenge." After all, to him, it was just another Tuesday. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the impact of the trial would echo for a long time. Legal experts debated how Musk had exposed flaws in the system. Lawyers re-examined their own cases, fearing the challenge of facing a mind like his. The judge, who once looked upon him with disdain, now spoke of him with respect. But Musk, he had already moved on. To him, this was not a legal battle. It was just another opportunity to show that, when confronted with a flawed system, logic always prevails. In the end, the greatest trial was not about him, but about the very laws that tried to bring him down.